Hello everyone, Scott Ferguson, Director Outbound Product Management with our Risk Solutions. I want to spend just a couple minutes today giving you a quick overview of our GRC suite of products. So we're going to start with a business stakeholder, in this case James, who's part of our finance organization, and we've given him a service portal to give him access. And this is a slightly configured service portal, but it's just to give quick access to some of the capabilities that our stakeholders would want to have access to. So for example, from a policy and compliance perspective, we have access to the policy library where he has access to the standards, the procedures, any policies that may be published that he may have to have access to or to understand or even attest to. And in this case, he can quickly drill into one of those and see the details that may be behind that particular policy, as well as have access and visibility into the requirements. When we've brought data in from an external source like the Unified Compliance Framework, where we may be bringing in regulations, standards, frameworks, and we can tie that information back to these individual policies so that someone has an understanding of what it is that they need to do, and more importantly, why it is that they need to do it. From here, we also have the ability to submit things like a risk event or a policy exception. So what we see here is in the ability to report a risk event, we're going to give James a form to fill out where he can kick off the process or the workflows around responding to this event that has occurred. How was it discovered? What's the impact of that? What needs to be done? And he can submit this through a service catalog item within the service portal. He also has the ability to do this through the virtual agent. So in this case, as we start having a conversation with the virtual agent, we can quickly see things like, well, we wanted to submit a risk event, or we want to submit a policy exception, and we can do that through a virtual agent. James also has the ability to respond to control attestations and risk assessments through the service portal, where he can provide the evidence that he needs to say that yes, this control is in place, or respond to a risk assessment and provide the information that we need to properly score a risk. Those scores are then used when it comes into understanding a risk framework or a risk library. So in this case, James has access to all the risks that's been assigned to him. He can view his dynamic risk register. He can do things like filter and apply different filters to this information to get to just the individual records that he's looking for. He can export this out into multiple forms so that if he needs to send it to a third party or whatever that may be, he has access to do that from within the service portal. Finally, he also has access to things like his controls from policy and compliance, or audit tasks that have been assigned to him from an audit perspective, or any of the response tasks or remediations that have been assigned to him through the various aspects through issues and tasks. Now, quickly, as we switch personas, we start with our risk overview dashboard. And this gives that risk manager or that compliance manager access to see the entire exposure to the organization through a heat map, as well as integrations to things like Risk Lens, where they can bring in and supplement things within ServiceNow with this additional information. Or as we look at things like risk tolerance, based upon the risk appetite of an organization, and they set the thresholds around tolerance, we can see risks roll up, risk scores by risk statement, where what's the average, the min and the max of those scores, as well as the sum. So as an organization, we can see the greatest area of exposure from a risk perspective. As we drill into this and touch on this a little bit further, our risk manager has the ability to filter the dashboards as well. And as we drill into this, using the same example that our stakeholder used, we can look at this set of risks around, that are maybe high, and our risk manager wants to focus on just some of those. And as we take a look at the risk, and I won't go into all of the details here, but there's an entire life cycle. We assess, or we take the assessments, we respond, and we've got the response tasks and how we're going to activate that. But then we've also have the ability to monitor. In this case, we've got a couple of different ways. We can tie these to controls, and using continuous controls monitoring within policy and compliance, we can actively look at compliant and non-compliance and have that affect our risk scores automatically. We can use risk indicators, and in this case, any of these, whether it's continuous controls monitoring and policy compliance or the automated risk indicators within risk, they're going to leverage data from anywhere in the platform. So in this example, I'm going to look at a security incident, and because that security incident exists, I can use that to automatically elevate the risk so that it shows up on that dashboard. And because this indicator has failed, we have a control failure factor, and in the end, we're calculating a new risk score of high based upon these various various methods, whether it was policy compliance or it was the risk indicator. This would manifest itself on that dashboard, and if we jump back to our dashboard, we can see that same information then as it's moved up in our heat map. As we move into our audit management application, we have visibility into bringing all of this information from a policy compliance and a risk perspective into one area. It's that trust but verify. We can know that the controls are in place, we can know that the policy is in place, we can know that risk assessments are occurring, but we need to validate that through test plans and control tests. We're going to evaluate the evidence that's been gathered in the policy and compliance application. We're going to evaluate information that may be available from a risk perspective, and we're going to understand from an asset-centric view of GRC how those different departments and business services or vendors or applications are doing from an audit perspective. Finally, the last thing that I'll talk about is to just give you a quick overview from a third-party risk or a vendor risk perspective. As we look at this vendor dashboard, our vendor manager has the ability to see what that portfolio is. We can do our risk tiering assessments to understand the criticality of a particular vendor and put them in the proper tier, then kick off a series of assessments, whether it's using the SIG or a data center questionnaire or a cloud security questionnaire. We can do document requests like ask for a SOC 2 survey, and then the vendor can interact with us and provide this information back through the vendor portal, respond to those assessments, respond to tasks, and have this dialogue going back and forth. So I appreciate your time today as we've done a quick walkthrough of our risk suite of products within ServiceNow. Thank you for your time today.